What's the biggest red flag during an employment interview? Story 1. An employee offered to walk me out of the building after my interview, and took the opportunity to basically warn me in not so many words about what the job really entailed. He was super friendly and diplomatic, just like he was making small talk shooting with me. Then did they mention you get to do X, because if you've got your heart set on that, you might be disappointed with the reality of the role, that kind of thing. Especially when he heard I was fresh out of college and would have had to move country for the job. Basically the job ad was complete BS, and he was making sure I knew. I will be forever grateful to people like him. Story 2. When I mentioned a company's dismal Glassdoor evaluations, they became so enraged that they ended the interview. Well, I suppose I escaped that danger. Story 3. My recent interview with what I thought would be a dream job went like this. You're the 6th person we've tried to make this position work for, and we're starting to think it's us. Story 4. It's a salaried position with flex time. Basically you'll be working 50 hours a week and only be paid for 40. Don't you dare flex any time though. Story 5. I've posted on this before, but one I don't see mentioned a lot is the eyes of the interviewers. I'm not talking about do they seem shifty or whatever, I mean do the people you're talking to seem chill and well-rested, or are their eyes bloodshot, dark circles under them, they seem exhausted. It's harder to tell on a Zoom interview, but you can look for it once you start to notice it. I've said no to companies based on this alone. If everyone in a company looks tired, it's because they are stressed out and are working extra hours all the time. Big red flag. Story 6. We need you to start as soon as possible. They're way behind schedule and will be immediately asking you to work long nights, extra hours on systems you're not familiar with, and then they'll yell at you when it doesn't get done in time. On top of that, they're probably in general, that's why they're behind schedule in the first place. They don't plan well, manage people well, or know how to handle their clients. Basically we need you here as soon as we can get you, means you're, or more accurately, there and it's about to become your problem. Story 7. They explained that you will for some reason not be an employee of the company, but an independent contractor that uses their facilities and is paid by them. Story 8. Beer fridges, ping pong tables, bring your dog to work days are usually a cover for a really shitty work environment, most likely recommended or brought in by HR to say they're doing something to improve morale. Story 9. 4 rounds of interviews, unreasonably complex or time-consuming interview questions. If they make you do this much work for free just for the interview, they're showing you that they have no respect for work-life balance. Story 10. Hey race, a few from my most recent interview, bad-mouthed a current employee, said I might be asked to work overtime. When I asked how often that might happen, she did not give me a clear answer, emphasized being a team player, and mentioned that some of their more dedicated employees have even come into work sick. Was not clear on where I'd be working or what the job site was like, emphasized needing employees who put the job first and not those who do their 40 hours and go home, mentioned the current supervisor was on leave, but did not know why, couldn't answer how many other employees were working at the site. Asked me if I could start the very next day, mentioned that they just had someone quit due to being unable to handle working 60-hour weeks. Unfortunately I was so desperate so I took this job, and I currently work here. So far there has been a ton of drama, but I've been able to fly under the radar for the time being. Since I was hired, 2 people have walked out. I needed my work uniform hemmed, and I was told during the interview that this would be reimbursed. That was a lie. Someone I trained with scraped a pole with a work vehicle while parking. It was honestly an honest mistake and not any kind of stupidity. She was suspended for a week and threatened with termination. I was written up for simply being in the car when it happened. My supervisor has had multiple fights with my manager, the person I interviewed with, and it got so bad my supervisor resigned. Today is her last day. One of my reliefs was over an hour late and showed up smelling strongly of weed. One of my coworkers disappeared while on the clock, and drove 45 minutes away to buy weed. Found out that all of us sans my supervisor, despite having the same title, are all being paid different wages. Story 11. I find a good question to ask is about traffic, especially of people who aren't the interviewers. Is traffic bad when you come into the office? How about when going home? Often you find out when the average person comes and goes. If it is 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., then you're doing good. If they say, at 6 a.m. the traffic is light, and I go home at 7 p.m. and it's light then too, you know the job is bad. Story 12. Things have been added to the list of job duties job description between your first and second interview. Also, beware when they want you cross-trained on everyone's job. That's so they can go on vacation, and then you'll do 2 jobs for the price of 1. Story 13. 2 big ones. For me, either in being interviewed by HR, or and arguably worse the IT director is present, but the HR person leads the interview. Both indicate a serious trust issue between the IT leadership and the rest of the company, either earned or just because the HR management is that uncomfortable with the tech and the people who keep it working. The other biggie, of course, is if you ask what they enjoy about working there and they have no answer prepared. When I had an interview with the IT director sitting like a statue in his chair while the HR person literally read questions off some top questions to ask in an interview-type website or a document shed cobbled together from a selection of such sites, I noped on out of there. Story 14. I work as a recruiter. These are red flags when I'm onboarding new clients, usually leading to me not taking their job. 1. We are open to someone with less experience, or the compensation structure is heavily weighted toward performance incentives, an excuse to not pay the industry standard for a job. 2. Not being transparent about pay structure or benefits. 3. having the same job open for a long time or having high turnover for that position. 4. Insisting that candidates share what they are already making to structure their payoff of that. It's an illegal question in a lot of states and a shitty way to attract and retain talent nationwide. Some green flags. 1. We are open to someone with less experience and these personality traits, as in we invest in our employees rather than we don't want to train or pay. 2. Transparency in all things, including hurdles the company is facing, long-term incentives, and the total scope of responsibilities. 3. High employee retention. 4. Salary negotiations based on experience and potential rather than what the candidate is already making. Oh, and if they don't have standards for their employees, will take any one bad job or company is planning to sell soon. Story 15. We don't allow any remote work. Despite it being a position done entirely on internet-connected laptops and phones, we really pride ourselves in our team culture. Nobody gives about team culture. They want to get paid. You don't need a union because we're your family. Run, but not before starting a union. Story 16. In 2017, I interviewed to teach at a small community college. It was a day-long affair and they showed me a video on the history of the school. The video was on VHS. Did I say it was in 2017? Story 17. On which side? As the interviewer, the biggest red flag is if the candidate doesn't know anything about the company or the role they are applying for. While obviously they aren't going to know the ins and outs of the specific role unless it's an internal candidate, they should at least know about the company and be able to articulate what about the company and role that made them apply in the first place. As the interviewee, mass turnover is a red flag. Companies or teams with high turnover usually have systemic issues which persist despite the change in employee makeup. Story 18. The worst I've heard was we work as hard as we want to. I should have taken them at their word. Walked into a situation where we were owed over $1 million by our vendor. We had around a month to collect before the parent company would shut us down. I had no idea before I started. The project manager and general manager had no idea on how to wrap up these jobs to get paid. I was able to get just under $750K paid out, but I was still laid off. Story 19. Companies aren't family. Companies should allow salary discussions. Companies must not make gendered nor racial assumptions. They can't ask me whether or not he'll be having a family and consider me lost goods if I decide to build a family one day. Story 20. We expect you to come in on short notice or stay late, without additional pay. You need to do this because you love this and not because of the money. Story 21. An older guy yells, loudly and in a patronizing way to a worker in a back room. While he was interviewing me, I told him, if that's the way you treat your employees, then I don't want to work here. Have a nice day. Story 22. People emailing you from all hours of the day during a hiring process. When you know they're in your time zone, do they work 247? Stressing how fast-paced it is, saying it once is fine. When you ask what the training and onboarding will look like, and they make it clear that you're just on your own from day one. Not part of the interview, but if you look up people from the company, and their turnover rate seems to be much faster than other comparable companies, when they stress flexibility with schedule, but it's a one-way street. You need to work all of your regular hours, plus any time we tell you need to work more, regardless of notice. Story 23. I know you applied for X, but we don't have an opening. How about Y? I hate this. I applied for X. I did not apply for Y. If I wanted Y, I would have applied for Y. Every time I've ever accepted Y, ended up in a miserable position and realized why they had such an opening in Y and not X. Story 24. At PetSmart, in order to get you in the system, we will have to put you in as a cashier. Then after 2 weeks you'll be in as dog trainer. They never took me off cashier, but I already quit my other cashier job, so I was stuck with them till I found a new job. I shouldn't have fallen for it, but I was a teenager and stupid. If they really were going to put you in that position, you'd start out with that position and the pay to go with it. Story 25. It always bothered me when they did not do their homework to find out more about me. One job I applied for was the best company in America in what we did. They gave me a temperament test to take. They also ran a credit check, a background check, and a moving violation record check. In addition, they called all of my references. I also handed them some written references. As part of the interview, I met with several people who would be under and over me. I was there for 9 hours. I felt honored that they interviewed me and then was even happier when they hired me. The vice president of the company was the first person to interview me and the last person to talk with me. He was absolutely the best person I have ever worked under. He was very competent and humble at all times. He was completely honest with me in every communication and in the interview. It was a sad day when he died about 10 years ago. I never knew that he was a Stanford graduate until I read his obituary. Often he would ask me to help solve a problem. There were several times when he implemented my ideas and sent a note to the owner of the company and myself. A strange thing happened when I showed at the new job. He told me my former boss called him and told him something about me. He told me he did not believe any of it. Eventually, I found out what it was and it was not true. The man was angry that I left. Story 26. Don't talk about pay. That, you should absolutely talk about it. Haven't done a job interview in like 5 years, but there are 2 for me. What are your wage expectations? If a company doesn't have set rates for a position, that's a pretty big problem from the get-go. It's usually just a way for them to extract information from multiple candidates to see how much will be an appropriate amount to offer you after you're hired. You might say 130K, they might try and hire you at 120K after talking to everyone else. The other one is when they begin to ask about marital status and children. That's another one of these questions almost designed to see how little they can give you. People with children and unemployed spouses need a job sooner rather than later. Story 27 asked to do a 6 to 7 hour test. It's obvious they wanted unpaid labor. No, pro tip: never agree to do unpaid work or training. Your time is important and you should be compensated. Also illegal depending on your local laws, asking about your orientation or religious beliefs or other similarly personal questions. During the interview they should only be seeking information that's actually relevant to the job at hand and would be an invasion of one's privacy otherwise. Story 28 One-way video interviews. Any sort of process that attempts to use an AI tool to assess candidate quality, it's a bunch of pseudoscientific horseshit, and HR is rife with this nonsense. Story 29 So, are you a Democrat or a Republican? First of all, I'm obviously not answering that. Second of all, this actually happened to me, I bailed. Story 30 I have a few having to meet with multiple irrelevant people. If my work does not impact yours directly, then we don't need to meet. Too many rounds of interviews. 2 is enough for most roles. The only time you should have a third interview is if it's senior management tech-sec level asking you to do mock work. They are either stealing ideas or don't know what a bullshitter sounds like talking, so they need a presentation or other work sample to see, offering straight time as a benefit. Yeah, I know your target salary is 90K, but if you factor in the 80K base and 10 overtime you'll be just under 90. Doesn't that sound awesome? No, I should not go into a job expecting to be working an hour of overtime most days in order to get the compensation I'm seeking. Story 31 Can you start tomorrow? I don't know why people just quit the job. We treat each other like family at this job. You'll have to wear many hats here at the job. Probation is 90 days, and we will do an evaluation if you are fit for full-time. In the meantime, your contract, so there is no benefits for you till then. Story 32 If they say something like, at company we're a family, I leave. I already had a family and I don't need another. Besides, what they mean by family is treat you like and expect everything with nothing in return. Story 33 Badmouthing the person who had the position prior. All I could think was, lady, I don't know you or the last guy that worked here, and I want no part of this. I want work for mean people. Story 34 This will probably sound weird, but chair height. There's been a couple interviews where the seat I'm in is lower than the interviewers. I end up looking up while they're staring down. I've also found those interviewers overbearing. They're quick to correct my answers to questions and displays horrible body language. Story 35 Was told all our people share their time, their talent, and their treasure with the community. After asking for an explanation, I was told our CEO has identified charities that we all support financially. Everyone also volunteers at least one Saturday every month to work in a community project. Nope. Story 36 Everyone wants to work for me. Why should I hire you instead? One of the other idiots out in the lobby. You probably want to hire someone else. They might put up with your bullshit. I got up and walked out. Story 37 I've worked in resort and property maintenance for 10 years. And the biggest red flag I've noticed is requiring that you bring your own tools. If they are too cheap to buy the tools needed to repair their own property, they are going to be cheap when it's time to ask for a raise. Story 38 I had an interviewer ask me if I could do an unpaid trial run of the job for a day and see if it was a good fit for me. They shut down a month later. Oh. Story 39 A company I interviewed with had generators outside to power the lamps and computers inside. They said they outgrew their last buildings and haven't turned on the lights yet. My immediate thought was, or, you didn't pay your bills at the last few buildings. Story 40 I interviewed for a position as a school teacher and the director wanted to do a fake scenario with me, which was fine at first. He was pretending to be a student who was upset about failing their exam and asked me to react. I was super calm at first and really felt like I was doing the right thing, but at some point he got more agitated and started yelling at me, still doing the fake scenario, but he was taking it so far that, in reality, if that happened, I would have simply called security. I was almost scared he would punch me tbh. I just stopped the scenario by saying I didn't know what else he wanted me to say. I left shaken and really didn't want the job anymore. It would have been one thing if it was a real situation, but he was being so unhinged that it threw me off completely. Story 41 You are expected to render overtime work, but you'll have no overtime pay. Run TF away. P.S. I'm a talent acquisition specialist. Oh, and by the way, HR doesn't give a single F.C.K. about employees. We simply exist to protect the company's interest. We will replace you if you decide to quit. Story 42 This'll get buried since I'm so late, but by the far the worst one I've had on a job I unfortunately accepted was this company does not believe in being rewarded for staying at home. As such, all days you are away sick will be unpaid. This is illegal in BC, straight up. Other amazing illegal they did subtracting a percentage of your pay towards a vacation fund which is supposed to be your paycheck when you go on vacation. Except paid vacations are the law here, so it was just wage theft. Lying to clients about the qualifications of employees, sending employees onto active provincial work sites without appropriate safety gear, equipment, or supervision, and not reporting injuries. Fired a guy because he was black and some clients didn't like it. The company is TLC Solutions out of Vancouver and the CEO's name is Sungbum Yu. Story 43 I once was asked what my parents did. Realized way too late that I should have just walked out of that interview. My mum struggles with her physical and mental health, but honestly, this should not be of any concern to my potential employer. Says nothing about me as a person. I felt weirdly violated by that interview. Story 44 The opposite can be true as well. I worked at a place where most of the staff had been working together for over 25 years. Don't take the job. They have their jobs and work dynamic right where they want them. They will be an unbreakable clique and will be impervious to change. The bosses will have zero control of them and you will be on the outs constantly. Been there. It is healthy for a company to have a 5-year turnover on most jobs. Story 45. Using a lot of buzzwords. I am a teacher, and when a principal is using a lot of buzzwords, I know that their school isn't actually accomplishing much. It means that they spend money on the latest certifications or methodologies. There is not an environment of teachers creating their own school community. Story 46. I interviewed with a very small insurance company to be a part of their benefits team. I had just moved to a new city with my boyfriend, now husband, a 25-year relationship. I was still very green. Their VP knew I was a transplant and asked what brought me here. I should have said something more thought out, but being young, I said I had moved here to be with my boyfriend and start roots. The VP said, I see, so you chase boys to new cities. I can't see you being serious here. I told him that was incorrect and that me being there was very much planned. I ended up telling the HR department that I wanted to withdraw my application. I didn't want to work for a man or company like that. Story 47. I work a blue-collar job, and one thing I make sure to do in an interview is ask to take a tour of the shop. I'm looking for general conditions of the equipment and tool rooms. If the equipment isn't well maintained, that usually means they are not investing back in the company or the employees. Story 48. When they ask you a question about a moral issue, is it okay to lie? And should they retain their job if they do? And then proceed to insist on a black and white answer as though the question is somehow not a vast sea of gray. Yeah, missed out on that sheriff's department job with my answer. But as a bonus, I pissed off that lieutenant to the point he shut down the interview when I presented the concept of context. He didn't realize talking to me condescendingly like I was some idiot country bumpkin would be answered in kind somewhere. Dude legit argued that the question was black and white and nothing else. Right, okay. Story 49. So I'm actually a hirer. Red flags I have personally are when someone hits every green flag of mine. We hire people who don't typically get hired. I interviewed a guy who, when I asked how do you adapt to change, told me he was a Gemini. That answer was horrible, but I knew he was being honest with me, so I hired him and he was great until he left. Story 50. When I made it to the second to last interview for a job, one of the people interviewing me told me the manager had a strong personality. I had had some tough bosses, so I thought I could handle it. I lasted 1 week at that job because the manager was so rude and condescending, and would often complain about other employees to me. The person after me also did not stay very long. Lesson learned. Story 51. When they ask a ridiculous question at the end like what animal would you be if you had the choice, or how do you make a PBJ? I've only seen this when there's more than one interviewer, but it's a way to signal to the other interviewer that they won't be hiring you without tipping you off. Story 52. I was being interviewed by an attractive female boss. She stated that she has 3 openings. I nodded and said I know. There was a very awkward silence after that. Story 53. The interviewer being vague about what your job entails. Quite a lot of business owners do this to get more people in the door. That means you may be going for what you think is a packing and wrapping job and end up doing stuff like cleaning the toilets and being the manager's lapdog. That. Story 54. Lowballing. I had a guy offer me 11 hour that was advertised online as minimum $14.50, also asking if you're willing to take initiative or fill in where necessary. That's code for being understaffed and having shitty workers who will need you to do every job in the building. Story 55. There is a company that advertises on the radio in my area where they specify say to just show up, don't call first, and you don't need a resume. That strikes as a significant red flag to me. Story 56. Not given an interview but immediate onboarding that had to be completed on my personal phone. A door-to-door sales position that offered up to $50K but would lose the position if failing to sell less than 6 contracts. I noped out real quick and the sales manager was none too happy. Story 57. Not specifying what the job is. I got hired for a job they said I didn't need to know anything I knew about and got fired after 2 weeks watching someone else work behind their desk. Story 58. My last employer didn't check anyone's BA credentials or references. He just trusted our word. Mind you, I worked with underage asylum seekers. The whole year was chaotic from one thing to the next. Story 59. What church do you go to? Illegal to ask, but I can think of at least 5 interviews where it was asked. One time it was asked because the employer wanted me to be available on weekends during a supposed 8 to 5 job. The other time was religious nuts looking to hire only fellow religious nuts. Story 60. A story from Europe. I've just overheard a girl in the public transport during my daily commute. She is a student, went for a phone interview for a 20-week position. The interviewer's first question was about her schedule. The girl said 20 hours per week is fine, she can be there. The guy's response: that is not enough, you have to be here more. It was listed as a 20-week position. Second question: how long will you stay with us? Are you planning to get pregnant in the foreseeable future? The girl was around 20 years old. She said she could stay there for at least a year. After that she will get her bachelor's degree. I wanted to interrupt, to point out the red flags, but I didn't. Story 61. Went to an interview. The manager interviewing me wasn't there yet. Was told by staff to return an hour later as the manager will be arriving then. Ended up waiting another 30 minutes. After arriving an hour and a half late to the interview, the manager proceeds to explain to me over a 15-minute time period that they only accept perfection. Story 62. I once interviewed with L'Oreal for an amazing corporate job at their HQ in Manhattan. They told me if you only want to work 50 hours, this is not the place at all for you, implying 60-70 hour work weeks minimum. They said it's very common to see people in the office who are usually still here around 8 p.m., as if that was some badge of honor. Sick. I think most of those people were single and had cats. Prestige and glamour doesn't mean. I withdrew as I really didn't want to finish in there. Story 63. I had a cold call recruiting me to come work at a position I wasn't thrilled with, but could be fine with the right environment and pay. The guy started complaining about how much the guy leaving made BC. He didn't think the role was worth that much, and I told him I'm currently making more than the guy you're complaining about. I won't be taking that job. Story 64. I had an interview in a very sparsely marked or decorated office building. I asked the interviewer if they had just moved in, to which he replied, "Oh, I'm just borrowing this office temporarily to conduct interviews." I asked him if he always hangs his diploma on the wall in offices that aren't his. When he finally gathered his thoughts, he actually told me I'd be a perfect fit. It was a security job since I was so observant. Then he started telling me how for only a $500 fee, I could get my security license through them and get a guaranteed job offer. I got up and left. Story 65. When they scream at you during the interview. I had this happen once, and the guy also thought he could have me do a tryout for the company and not pay if he didn't want to keep me. Story 66. Family business means we put ourselves first. You and your family are a second thought. When they end a labor's position interview with, "By the way, we don't pay overtime." When they ask, "Are you a Christian?" Yet these are a few things I've seen experienced in interviews in my 50 years of working. Story 67. The owner of an antique jewelry shop in Brighton, England, compared himself to Jesus Christ. People persecuted Jesus and people persecute me. He then had the audacity to ask me why I was looking at him strangely. Story 68. As a woman, if there's a man interviewing you who interrupts you and doesn't let you finish your sentences, I worked for him for 8 months and know it never did get better. He would also tell me when I was getting a raise and would think it was a high honor to be making 14 hour. It took previous employee a year to earn that wage. No sir, you just don't value your employees. 14 hour isn't that much for skilled labor, and it doesn't come closer to what I made at previous jobs. Story 69. This actually happened to me at my first factory job. I worked at a Honda plant, but at the interview when they let us know if we got the job, a few things struck me a little funny. 1. I failed a written test, and 2. I failed a color blindness test. So I definitely should not have gotten the job. In fact, they dropped a guy there who had actually worked there before and had experience. Red flag. But the biggest was when they handed me the paper telling me my position and time I needed to come in for my first day. The interviewer asked if we had any questions. I simply just asked, what does injection mean and what are my duties on injection? First factory job, so probably really stupid and nervous questions, and the woman, I swear, just stood and glared at me as if I just told her I kicked her puppy. It was so uncomfortable, but I should have known better than to fall for the any questions portion, and should have just jumped ship, because the 1 year I worked there was a total show from start to finish. Honda. Story 70. We don't believe working 40 hours is really working. If you work that amount of hours, you're not doing enough. Most people here work at least 60 hours per week. Story 71. In college, I went to a job interview to be a waitress. The restaurant manager came into the room smiling and then took one look at me and frowned. As the interview went on, he eventually asked if I would be more comfortable in the back. He didn't even look at my resume. Like, I know I'm nothing special in the looks department, but he didn't need to make it so obvious. Story 72. Your scheduled interviewer is on vacation. Yes, somebody in corporate scheduled this interview with a manager, either without checking their availability or deciding they could just come back to interview a new underling. Then they asked me to fill out a paper application after I had filled out the online one. LMAONO. Story 73. Team player. Fast-moving, multitasking, family. Salary will be reviewed later. Undefined, flexible. Performing these duties too. All indications of a place and job. Story 74. Many years ago, I was looking at getting out of fast food management and thought about some kind of sales job. One of the companies liked me and wanted me to come on board. I asked about training and was told that I would be working with a senior salesman and we would call on my friends and family, because I would be more at ease talking to them. Even as young as I was, I knew this was, they were hiring me as a source of leads and would have an increased chance of making the sales because I was there. If I had accepted the position, I would have finished training after all of my friends and family had been called. I've heard from friends through the decades since then that this is still going on. Story 75. I always ask what their staff turnover rate is, and the job I'm going for, why the person left. If they say the position is a merger of roles or will remain the same. High staff turnover. Not good. Don't know the staff turnover, but great. Merger of roles, that. Story 76. My interviewer told me that I should not accept the job as a supervisor at a poultry processing plant during the facility walkthrough. I should have listened to him. Story 77. When they want you to take a timed logic and reasoning test. I have a degree that proves my competence, so don't waste my time with your bullshit tests. Me, what are the opportunities for career progression with this role over time? The HR person, great question. That was the whole reply. Story 78. I'm sure you'll fit well. Basically, boss speak for our employees are not a red flag for me because that's what I am, but hopefully some of you can learn from this. Story 79. If they're unable to provide concrete responses to your questions about salary, schedule, location. Some tech companies in my city have several buildings across the city, actual role responsibilities, etc. Story 80. You never know, they all run a different angle. Just keep your wits about you. Ask lots of questions. and if you detect them being evasive in answering any of the questions, well, you found your red flag. Story 81 lol. Once I had an interview with 10 to 15 candidates in the waiting room. I decided I would still be open-minded, arrived a little early etc. Fast forward an hour and a half later, I went up and asked why my scheduled interview was taking so long, and I don't really remember the answer I was given, then waited another 20 minutes. I politely let them know I would be leaving and asked them to cancel my interview. I didn't make it halfway home and the guy was very eagerly calling me, letting me know I was giving up a very big opportunity. Boy bye, I guess I'll never know. Long story short, too many candidates and not honoring your scheduled interview time, no thanks. Story 82. I had a store manager that was interviewing me tell me if I have to do all the work myself and fire everyone else I will. I'm glad I didn't get the job. It was a Firestone service center. Story 83. When they are talking current employees in the interview, I've had that happen a few times and I knew that was definitely not a place I wanted to be. Story 84. I once did an interview with Infinity Car for a sales position. 3 guys piled into the office and started asking me if I had a boyfriend and would he care if I got hit on by a bunch of guys while selling cars. Also, that they do cocaine sometimes and would I rat them out. They offered me the job and told me I had to do a drug test, but there's a smoke shop down the street that offered fake pee. Needless to say I left and never went back, ended up working at BMW and let me tell you it was the same. Story 85. I applied to like Ross when I was 19, showed up 5 minutes early, and they had me wait at the front of the store for the manager. Dude ended up being 20 minutes late and seemed disinterested. I kinda knew that I didn't want to work there by that point, but dude ended up telling me to do some second round of the application process online, but I was like this is a Ross.